And we are recording. Welcome back, everybody, to another podcast. Uh, oh man, I'm a little rusty. I haven't done this in a while. So if this is your first time checking out our podcast, this is dedicated to understanding the ins and outs of wildlife science, and using that information to improve our effectiveness as hunters, fishermen, and conservationists when we're out in the woods or on the water. Um, we are your hosts. I am Mark Barton, and you may have seen me on YouTube channels like Swamp and Stomp and Mark Goes Outside. Then we've got Cody Eggenberger.
What's
You
that?
want to say anything about yourself, Cody?
Finishing up PhD student. Getting close. This year, I'll be defending.
Like he likes fish,
I like
but
fish.
he's our relatively new hunter, so he brings in that sort of newbie hunter perspective. And then we got Matt. Matt is
Let's go.
also a PhD, and he's over in Colorado. Me and Cody in Florida. So every episode of this podcast, what we basically do is we pick a single wildlife research study to dive into and get a better understanding of it. And today we are continuing our discussion of Puma concolor, aka the mountain lion, because in the last episode we talked about how hunting affects the population structures of mountain lions, and today we're going to be talking about the effect that mountain lion populations have on population structures of black-tailed deer in California, where mountain lions have not been hunted for decades, a really, really long time. So we can see the long-term effects of what that does. So if any of this interests you, make sure that you like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, whatever platform you can find this podcast on, there's different ways to subscribe. So just make sure you do that. And we are definitely going to gloss over some details because this paper, in fact, this isn't even a paper, it's a technical report. It's 63 pages long. We're obviously not going to cover that in just an hour. So we're going to gloss over some details. And if you want to read the paper yourself and get all of those details, there's going to be a link down in the description that's going to bring you to all the papers that we discuss in our episodes. So you can read it yourself. Before we dive in, I just have a couple of announcements for upcoming events and things that you guys might be interested in. And this is all down in Florida because that's where I am and that's what I know about. So this upcoming weekend, immediately after this podcast comes out, there's an event called Saddle Flowza. It's going to be a saddle gear and climbing methods workshop that's held at the Lake George WMA campground. Camp out all weekend, hang out with a bunch of hunters, talk about hunting. It's kind of a show and tell thing. Like people show, their things, their modifications that they've done. There's a whole bunch of gear being given away. So if you've been curious about saddle hunting, this is an awesome workshop. And again, there will be a link in the description if you want to check out the details for that. Then at the FWC commission meeting is coming up in February it is February. On the 26th and 27th will be this commission meeting. It's going to be hosted at the FSU, Florida State University Student Union, and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is hosting a pint night at the Proof Brewery inside of that same student union the evening of the 26th. So if you want to come hang out, talk with a bunch of hunters about conservation, maybe discuss the potential bear hunt that's going to be decided on in May, come to this event. And they're also going to be raffling off a bunch of Sitka gear and selling merch. So should be a good time. Hopefully we'll see y'all there. And one last one. This one's like way ahead of time. I've been helping out with organizing the annual Lake Kissimmee Mudboat Poker Run, and this year it's going to be on May 17th. This is usually a huge event, so if you've got a boat or if you've got a friend that's got a boat, literally any kind of boat, we allow every kind of boat to participate. You can find all the details about that if you go to tinyurl.com/kissmudrun. And this year, for the first time, we've got like a crazy raffle prize. And honestly, I have no idea how we managed to get this raffle prize, but we're going to be raffling off a Uncle J custom mud boat that's worth like $15,000 to $20,000. I don't even know exactly how much it's worth. It's super sweet, and you can buy tickets for that raffle in advance. They're cheaper if you buy them before the event, and you just go to tinyurl.com/UncleJBoat, and you'll be able to get your tickets. All right, so
What's
that's
a
all my
mud boat?
announcement. Mud boat, a mud boat. Well, technically, that is an incorrect term that people use all the time. Technically, the boat is not a mud boat. It's really the motor that makes a mud boat.
Yeah.
It's a mud motor, a surface drive motor, which
Yeah.
basically is just a motor where the propeller's like half in, half out of the water. It runs right at the surface, so that you can run, through vegetation and mud and all that stuff. Realistically, the boat itself is just like a duck boat. It's like an overbuilt John boat. But Uncle J Custom Boats, they make really awesome boats. They're all custom made right here in Florida, I think, maybe in Georgia. Actually, I'm not sure, somewhere around here. And yeah, super durable boats. They're really reputable. And somehow Andy Outdoors, who's the guy that we're organizing this with, convinced Uncle Jay to put together this custom boat. It's like super sick. It's got like custom paint job, like camo paint job, and then it has sea deck covering the whole thing. With the proceeds are going to Kids Outdoors. So any money that we raise is going to this awesome organization that gets kids outdoors, and their logos like on the sea deck and stuff. It's super sick. So if anybody's interested in it, go check out. Like I said, tinyurl.com/UncleJBoat, and you can buy tickets. You do have to be present to win it, though, so you got to
Oh,
come to the event.
man.
Oh, I mean, I guess you just got another excuse to come down to Florida.
Yeah, that might be a tough one to fly back.
I mean, you can drive it back,
Yeah, yeah,
get a rental, or just keep it down here. I'll babysit it for you.
yeah. There you go.
I mean, if you really wanted to buy tickets from out there, you could buy them and give them to me, and then if you win, I'll let you know.
Sorry, Matt, you lost, but I won the boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so anyway, before we dive into, I'll keep wanting to call them Panthers, but I guess they are Panthers. Before we dive into mountain lions, we're gonna do things a little differently. So if you've been listening to the podcast for a little while, you know that we like to let you guys help us choose what the topics are going to be that we're discussing. We usually do it at the end. Sometimes people don't make it all the way to the end, so we decided we would do it at the beginning. So we're right on the cusp of turkey season in Florida, and other states are going to be following just a few weeks behind. And so we want to shift our focus of the podcast to turkey hunting for the next few episodes. And so we've gone ahead and picked out a few topics that we thought were really interesting, and we want you guys to vote or comment and let us know which one of these topics you want us to discuss next. So I'll start since I'm already talking anyway. I picked out a paper. It's a relatively new paper that was done by the turkey. I forget what people call him, but Mike Chamberlain is like the turkey researcher that like everybody knows. He's kind of like the godfather of turkey research, and they're looking at the influence that weather patterns have on gobbling behavior. So I don't know if you've ever like gone out to the woods to listen for turkeys, or even if you're going to hunt, but mostly right now I'm thinking about scouting. You're heading out to the woods, and it's like, why did they gobble their heads off yesterday but not today? And are there any predictors in that you can pick better days to go listen for gobbles? And so this paper is going to get into that and help us better understand when we can expect turkeys to be gobbling really good.
That's a cool one. That's one of my first times turkey hunting. It was back in Vermont, and snowed like opening morning, and I was like not hearing anything, and I was like, what the hell goes on when turkeys when it's snowing out? And so sitting in my blind, I was looking up how weather affects turkeys, and
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah,
Well, so my thought process with this, and this is like why I wanted to look this up, is like if you if you go to a spot to listen for turkeys and they don't gobble, then like, am I going to convince myself that there's no turkeys there?
hmm
You know, and then like overlook that spot when actually there's turkeys there. And so, like, I think it's important to know how the weather affects it so that if I don't hear gobbles, I can at least convince myself that like there might still be turkeys there. It's just they weren't gobbling.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like there's so much doubt that I put in my mind about like whether a spot's good or not, and I
Mhm.
want to stop doing that. So that was my my reason for picking this paper. Anyway, what do you guys got?
So I got a paper that focuses on hens, but it's looking at their the site selection for their roosts and looking at kind of like the network of roosts, and looking to see what factors influence where hens are going to go. And if you know where the hens are, there's a good chance you're going to know where the toms are. So that was kind of similar line of things, is like looking to see, get a better understanding of where these birds might be during the season.
In your experience, do they usually roost in the same tree?
They don't, no, not the same tree, but
Never.
it, yeah, but it is something where I think they've got their home range, and
Yeah.
they'll kind of bounce around, and that's kind of what this is talking about, like these hub roosts where they've got their main hub that they stick
Roost
around in,
areas.
and yeah, and so
Yeah.
yeah, so curious to see what it says about where they're going and what factors drive it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cody, what do you got?
All right. So this is my first year turkey hunting. So I'm going to be hunting a some heavily pressured public land. So I found this paper, how hens and toms respond differently to hunting pressure with regard to their resource use and habitat selection. So hoping I can get ahead of all these other hunters and figure out where they're going to be after everyone scares them out to these different areas.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see what I have theories about that, but we'll save that for the next podcast.
I've
Um,
skimmed it, so I can't really tell you too much
yeah.
on
No, no.
results yet, but
That's definitely interesting because, like I said, I have theories. I'd be curious to know if those theories are anywhere close to being correct. So that sounds like
I
that'd be
can tell
interesting to
you
find
there
out.
are differences between how the hens and the toms respond.
Well, I would imagine so because otherwise there wouldn't be much to talk about in that paper. Because
Yeah.
even though we should publish negative data, nobody ever does. All right, cool. So make sure that you guys vote, drop a comment, or if you're on Spotify, you can. There's actually a poll that you can vote. But let us know which one of those topics you want us to talk about next week. And now it is time for mountain lions. So Matt, you want to intro this one
Sure.
since
Yeah.
you
So Mark,
picked this monstrosity of a paper?
it's not a monstrosity. It was just a little bit on the longer side again. Um, so, like Mark said at the start, this paper follows up our Puma conversation from one of our previous episodes nicely, where this one's really looking at focusing on deer population in a national forest in California, where mountain lion hunting has been illegal for a number of decades now. And it's the Mendocino National Forest, and historically, the black-tailed deer population there was kind of like off the charts. So, in some regards, the population was too high. Um, but from a hunter perspective, it was something where the hunting success rate was extremely high as well. And uh, for a few decades now, the deer population has been going down in this national forest, largely based off of the hunter success rates. And after consecutive years of decline, the state biologists decided it was time to look into this population a little bit more closely to get a better understanding of what's driving the deer population numbers. And they worked with University of California, Davis, and it's actually kind of cool. Some of the co-authors are actually from New Zealand, it looks like. So it's this kind of interesting dynamic of diverse team to address this question of what's going on with the deer population there, and they took a bunch of methods to get into it that we'll talk about a little bit later. But they really wanted to look at drivers from, you can think of it at two ends of a spectrum, where you have deer that might be limited by resource availability. So things like, what's the food quality? How much food is there? If you have low amounts of food, that's going to have an effect on the population of the deer there. But then you could also have things at the other end where it's top-down effects. So predation, how is predation affecting the population? And obviously these two things can kind of interact with each other to have different effects. So they wanted to dive into each of these factors individually, the bottom up being kind of food quality, top down being predation, and then looking at interactions between the two to see how it affects the deer population, both in the numbers of like surviving deer, population growth to get an idea of what's the future of this population going to look like, but then also just getting a better understanding for how to manage the population. Is this something that there's anything the managers, the biologists can do, whether it be managing the deer for their the harvesting of the deer, or just getting a better understanding of the environment to know what population might look like going forward. So the Mendocino National Forest is about 385 square miles. There's
Before you go into that, I just wanted to
yeah,
add. So I think it's really interesting and like always noteworthy to me that the only reason that anybody ever studies mountain lions is not because they care about understanding mountain lions, but it's because they care about their prey, right? And this is like the same thing again, that the real resource here that the California game, I don't know what they call their
Department of Fish and Wildlife.
yeah, their Department of Fish and Wildlife, what they really care about in this instance is that black-tailed deer population, because realistically they're selling tons of hunting licenses for deer hunting, and we kind of talked about this last time, like the amount of people that are actually hunting um, mountain lions is like really small, and it's not really generating a ton of funds, but the resource that those mountain lions influence is the really important one. And same thing here again. So I think that's worth mentioning, that that's like really the goal of studying mountain lions is
Yeah.
not for the mountain lion itself necessarily.
And I think there definitely are some papers that look at mountain lions, but you're right. You can only research things if you got the funding for it, and a lot of the funding for this research is driven by the funds that come in from taxes on hunting and fishing sales, and so it just goes again to support how much of an important contribution those sales have on just understanding these populations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good point. So the study area here, as I mentioned, was this national forest, about 365 square miles, and it's interesting terrain. I didn't realize I know California has some high elevation, but it's got two. The area that they were looking at has these two large peaks or ridges that they were looking at, with a kind of valley between them. And in this area, black-tailed deer are the kind of main, prey species, or the main ungulate. So there's also some pigs in the area. It's interesting to see that there's some elk there that were reintroduced, but elk are pretty rare. And then there's also cattle in the area, depending on the season. During the winter, they come out of the mountains. But mainly that the main item, the main ungulate in the area is the black-tailed deer. And then there's also a diverse predator community. Like we said, they got the mountain lions there. Mountain lions are actually pretty infrequent. More common were the black bears. They also have coyotes, bobcats. I think those are all the main predators that they talked about. And so that was another cool thing about this paper, is that they looked at the influence that those other predators have on the deer population as well, but focused largely on deer population. And then they also looked a little bit mountain lions, and then to a lesser extent those other predators.
Nice.
Yep.
So should we get into methods?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take it away.
All
There's
right.
a lot to cover here. So
Yeah, so we're going to go real brief. So they needed to track the adult deer population and juveniles to look at mortality rates and where they're going. So they tranked, like, these methods always get me excited. It seems just to be in the, like, with these guys to figure out how they do that sounds super cool. But it sounds like they're driving down the road and they're tranking black-tailed deer. Once they're knocked out, they would go find them in the woods, put a collar on them, get like body morphometric and demographic info, so body condition, the age, whether or not these females were pregnant at the time, because that's going to be a factor that comes into their analysis later on for mortality rate and birth rate. With the fawns, they netted them, and instead of using GPS collar, they used VHF transmitters, and then would go out on a weekly or bi-weekly schedule, try and find those or locate those fawns and see if they were still
they were
moving around.
just curious. Like, what did you guys think when they said that they capture fawns by hand or by a large dip net? I'm like, what
Right.
the
Yeah.
like what kind of fawns are these? It's like I assume that they must
They're
be like fawns.
freshies,
I think,
Just
yeah,
right?
that's
yeah,
what.
like they're just laying down
Mhm.
like nursing or something. If,
So
I don't know, maybe a certain time of year they just when they see a doe, they just assume that there's a fawn nearby and they spook her off and go look for the fawn or something. Because like I've
that's
never
kind
come
of
across a fawn that won't run away.
that's kind of
I've
how I
never.
read it. Was that
Yeah,
they find these baby fawns where there's a doe in the area, and then they say, okay, there's a doe here, she's acting funny, there's got to be a fawn around. And
yeah.
I will say there's one time when I was younger, before I went to school, I saw this like thing in the backyard. I went out to look at it, and it was a fawn. It was just laying there, just sleeping in the backyard. I was like, what the? And I didn't realize it until like I got kind of close. And being young and naive, I kind of walked right up to this thing, and if I had a fishing net, I easily could have grabbed that thing.
I did the same thing in
So
high school, but I caught it. It was in the backyard, and I thought it was
Caught
like
it.
sick. So
now it's
we
your
like
pet.
we fed it for a bit, and then did some research and put it back out. And apparently, the scent isn't too big of a deal. But I did the same
Well,
exact thing.
so I will say that was one thing I thought was really nice about this paper is they did talk about that scent and how they were using like the human scent, because how that could
Hmm.
influence the ability for predators to find these things, the fawns. And it was cool that they were saying they use a fresh set of gloves every time, because they really didn't want to have any human scent on these fawns to to minimize their mortality rates. So they really did. They thought about everything, and that's reassuring to see that kind of stuff in the paper, because you could say, well, there's high mortality because you did this,
Yeah,
but
Yeah.
it seems like they try to account for that stuff.
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
it's like
I've never seen a fawn like that before. I've seen pictures and stuff. I know that people find them here in
Hmm.
Florida as well, but I've never seen one. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway,
one last point. Um, how do they track these adult deer that they tranquilize? They let them run for like at least 10 minutes, I think it said, and then they somehow track them down and find them after the fact. So there's no like
well,
trail to
but you'd
follow.
have to.
Maybe they have dogs.
Well, they might. I don't know if they had dogs, but you have to keep in mind like the habitat that they're in is a lot
Hmm.
more open than the stuff that we're hunting down
True,
here in Florida. So
true,
like they probably just watch the deer run away and fall over. Um,
true.
And they probably, like when you shoot a deer, well, here they're using a trank, but a lot of times, they'll run off real quick, and then sometimes they'll just kind of, after that initial burst, they'll kind of stop and say, what the hell just happened? And, imagine a deer that got hit with a tranquilizer. There's no big boom or anything like that. It's going to be pretty quiet. So, for them, it might just be like a bee sting in a sense. So they'll run off a little ways.
And
And then
the longer they wait, the more drowsy they get. So they're just like,
exactly.
I'm gonna take a nap right here.
Yeah.
Man, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Okay.
Like, I wish that if there was any researchers here in Florida that like needed help tranking deer, that they would call me, like because that sounds like just
It'd
such
be
a cool
so cool.
experience. So this is my shout out to like if there's anybody in Florida at FWC that needs some volunteers, me and Cody are ready to go. Reach out to us,
Hell
send us
yeah.
an email. Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right.
Um,
So should I move on real quick so I don't take too
yeah,
I
much
just want
we
to
time?
say
got we
one
got sidetracked there.
Yeah.
other quick thing, because you talked about how they age these things. They separate it into like the yearlings, like these prime adults, and then the senescent ones, so basically the ones that aren't going to be contributing anything else to reproduction, which they call deer over 8 years old. And I was like, how come do they have deer that are that old? But they had a deer that they aged at 22 years old, a female, and
Oh
the
man,
only reason she died was predation. But that's just
muleys get old. That's
yeah,
like I remember hearing it like another time, but like I kind of forgot until I was reading this paper, like how old muleys get. It's like it's no wonder their antlers are giant, you know.
yeah,
I mean, I don't think that actually has anything to do with it, but it's funny because in white-tailed deer, people are talking about like 3.5 year olds, like
yeah,
an adult. So if you get one that's over 5 years, that's like, that's a mature buck,
yeah.
and then people are talking about like those 7 and 8 year olds that are just kind of like the holy grail, and here these things like that's pretty normal for them to get to that age. So
Hmm.
it's kind of crazy how different those systems are.
Hmm. All
Um,
right, go for it, Cody.
yeah,
All right.
continue.
So measure the top-down effects. So from the predators, they tranked and GPS colored mountain lions in the area. I think they ended up with like 5 of them, 4 or 5,
5
and
females and 2 males.
or 6. Didn't they? They maybe lost one. I can't. But
No, there was 6. There was 5. No, I wrote this down somewhere. Well,
yeah, I can't.
that's results. You let me cover that,
All right. Oh yeah, 5 females, 2 males. All right.
dude. That's
Um,
my part.
and then for those other potential predators, they use camera traps. Um, so trying to just get presence absence kind of data from that. So then move on to deer population estimates. They looked
Wait,
at
but before you do that, I think it's important to mention like how they're using those GPS
Hmm.
coordinates, because you know
for the
they
panther or for the mountain lion.
well to identify because they're also looking at mortality and survivorship, and so they're using those GPS locations to identify potential kill sites, and so they were using it for both from the deer GPS and the puma GPS collars. So for deer, obviously if like it stopped moving, they identified that as a potential kill site and they would go investigate it as quickly as possible so that they could understand the cause of mortality. Um, and then for the pumas, if they had 5 uh, repeated locations, like they were in the same spot, then that was a potential kill site for them to go and check out, and they would go and check those out. And so that's how they not only used that GPS information to understand where the animals were, but also to investigate potential kills, which was a
Yeah,
huge part of what they were doing.
Also, just
yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, and
real
then with the mountain lions, they also estimated the population size of the mountain lions with that home range overlap. I think that
Yeah.
just quickly mentioned. All right,
also
sorry,
one
Matt.
other
Yeah,
thing, because I thought this was really cool with the those kill sites that Mark was talking about. They looked at like where the mountain lions, what the bite marks on the carcasses were, and the level of decay to say like, was this actually killed by the mountain lion based on what they're seeing. So that way they could determine if the deer died from a mountain lion or if it was something that, maybe one of the other predators in the system, or maybe this is something that
Yeah.
died of other causes and it was decaying and the mountain lion came across and scavenged it. And so they did a really good job of looking at what the factors were, whether it was mountain lion mortality or other factors that caused the death of these things.
Yeah, but I also kind of wonder like how accurate is that? Like because it sounds like it's a very qualitative assessment where they kind of look at it and go, okay, this is already decaying, so that must have happened earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I mean, when you're talking about a difference of days, like something killed this and then a mountain lion started eating on it a day or two later, like, can you really tell that, like, to that level of accuracy? I don't know.
Well, that's where I think the bite mark stuff is so cool, because based on that you can see, is this something that was already dead, or does it have
Yeah,
the bite marks on the neck or whatever it would be that would cause them to, like, their typical way of
yeah,
killing something. But that's a good point. It's something where they have a good way to like, if they see that something was killed by a mountain lion, like, that thing was killed by the mountain lion. If they
yeah,
don't see that, it's maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, and so their estimates of mortality from mountain lions could actually be, if anything, just a little bit on the low side. So, and that's, I think they mentioned that in the paper as well. It's like, if anything, their estimates of mortality are on the low side of things.
right. Which is crazy because, well, when we get into those numbers, like, they're pretty darn high. So, um, yeah. Anyway,
All right. Last couple of things. So I mentioned they estimated the mountain lion population size in that area using GPS locations and spatial overlap of their home ranges. For the deer, they used DNA markers with their scat. So it was a mark
which, by the way,
recapture.
is so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, I thought
they
that
do that
was
with
like
fish.
gene. I thought that was
Uh-huh.
probably my favorite part of this paper. I was like, you guys did what? Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Keep going.
No, you're good. I just want to know how many grad students got degrees out of this report. Like, there's so much going
Yeah,
on.
Like, I
There's
want
like
to
an
know how many
army.
grad students got their degrees by picking up deer poop.
dissecting
uh,
deer poop.
so they used the genotype deer poop to get an estimate of how many deer were in the area. They also dug through that poop to kind of look at what resources they were using, what they were eating. Um, they did some on or in the field on the ground vegetation surveys to again look at those bottom up effects to the deer population. So what's available to them uh, in these different habitats in the area, and then is there anything I'm missing? They did some
Yeah,
the
I was going to say
weather
that
stuff.
they checked to see how weather affected things, if that had any correlation or any associations with the survival rates, and then they also, with the collars, the GPS collars on the deer, they looked at what their home range was, and how frequently they were migrating outside of that typical home range, and what factors might
You know?
um, drove them to move outside of their home range.
Yeah, and that was actually. I mean, we'll kind of come back to that, but that was a really interesting conclusion that they drew. Was like that when when deer were faced with suboptimal conditions in terms of like resources, they would go outside of their home range more often, which would put them at more risk for
Mm-hmm.
predation, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then there's this like survival analysis where they like tried a whole bunch of different models to see like what would fit the data the best. Um, we don't have to go into the details of that, but essentially they estimated the proportion of the population that would survive for each age class. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. All right. Results. Again, I'm not going to go into like all the details here. We could just kind of talk about things as we go through. But so total from 2008 to 2013, they captured 61 does, and then there was another 23 from a previous study that were captured 2004 to 2007. Then for the fawns, they got 137 fawns. 72 of them were female, 64 of them male. And then mountain lions, they like. I was kind of surprised at the numbers here. Like, there's only 5 females and 2 males um, during that study, and it just goes to show like how many deer there are compared to those pumas, and yet that small number of pumas has such a huge impact on the population of these deer. It's really, really interesting. I also thought it was uh, pretty interesting that three of those females died during that 5 year period that they were doing the study, and
Mhm.
one of the males died. Um, they said that the male that died from getting in a fight with another puma, and they saw it pretty beat up, and then eventually it stopped moving, so they knew that it had died. Um, Two of those females died from natural causes. One of them had some sort of infection in
Infection.
the yeah, like a reproductive tract infection. Um, I can't remember what the other one was, but then
That one was nuts.
there was
The
one that they killed by accident.
So the other one that died from natural causes, they think it was associated with a hunting event for that, not a human hunting event, but with that mountain lion was hunting and fell
Oh
off like a
yeah,
cliff
Right, and like
and hit like
fell.
some sharp rocks. Yeah,
yeah. Which is just, I mean, it's crazy like the life that these animals
yeah.
live. It's just wild,
Have you
like
guys?
that's a perfectly like normal thing that could happen.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So it's kind of wild that literally half of the or more than half of the population that they were monitoring died in that 5 year period.
mhm.
Um,
Have you guys
and
seen the
then
videos of mountain lions hunting on cliffs, like where they just go in like into a free fall while gripping like
Yeah, and
I
deer
think
by
just
the
you're
neck?
thinking
tumble and
of
roll.
I think you're thinking of there's like a really famous video of like a lynx doing this with like a mountain goat or something, and they just like tumble down these rocks, and like it's insane. Yeah.
I've seen one with mountain lions too.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
where they're
I've
just
never seen
rolling and like bouncing off of rocks, and you're like, how is that thing not dead? And then it gets up at the end, and just starts like the deer's dead, but the mountain lion's like, yep, just another
Well,
day.
cats have 9 lives,
All
you
right.
know. But they're also, I mean, cats are like super flexible, and the whole thing of like cats always land on their feet. Like, um, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of why they've like evolved those cat-like reflexes is for those kinds of situations.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause in those situations, like those reflexes can mean life or death.
Yep.
Whereas a deer is like super galunky and just like slamming into rocks and stuff and
Yeah.
is dead before it gets to the bottom. The cat's like pretty bruised up, but it's like, hey, I'm bruised up, but I got plenty of meat to,
Yeah.
heal me up. So yeah, it's a pretty wild life out there. Um, so 761 fecal pellet samples that provided full genotypes. That's a lot of shit. Um, 342 unique individuals were identified from those samples, and they identified a sex ratio of the herd, um, which essentially came out to 37% of the herd is male. Um, and from this, they also estimated the density of the deer, um, which was 33 to 70 deer per square mile, which is like really high.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I've looked at the deer density of like whitetails in the U.S. and that's I mean that's right around the highest whitetail density that you're gonna find in this country. Like where I went hunting in Wisconsin was like one of the highest counties in the country, and it was like 63 whitetails per square mile. So this is potentially higher than that. And I kind of wonder if this is inflated because they were looking at these like fawning areas. They were
Hmm.
specifically only sampling in fawning areas, or bedding areas or whatever you want to call them. And so those areas might have had like sort of artificially, or not artificially, but just naturally inflated density of deer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't
Yeah.
know. Like I don't remember seeing them address that factor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just it's something to keep in mind that those numbers might be a little on the high side. Um, and then, as Cody said, the mountain lion density was determined from the overlap um, of the ranges based on those GPS collars. And there's like well-known relationships there. The sort of the more based on the degree of overlap, you can get a pretty good estimate of the density. So they estimated that to be 1.12 mountain lions per 100 square miles. So like put that into perspective. One mountain lion per 100 square miles versus 33 to 70 deer per square mile. Like that's a lot of
Yeah.
food that's available for these mountain lions. And yet that small number of mountain lions has measurable impacts, negative impacts on those deer populations. That's kind of crazy. Um, what I thought was super cool was that of those GPS clusters that they identified, where basically a mountain lion spent 5 like consecutive time periods in one spot, they would go investigate those locations, and 98% of them were actual kill sites. It's like insanely accurate that
Mhm.
that method is. And of those kill sites, 82% of them were confirmed as black-tailed deer. And then the other 18% were other animals, of which two of them were black bears, which I
Yeah.
thought was crazy. Like these mountain lions, they seem pretty small to me, like compared to uh, I've seen pictures of like pretty large mountain lions, but these things were the females were on average like 50 kilograms, and then like the males were 100. Oh, wait, did I say that correctly?
I'm gonna have to pull up the conversion for that.
Actually, now that I said it out loud, I was like, oh, kilograms, not pounds. Yeah,
So
so
they were
100 kilograms. That's actually a pretty big mountain lion.
decent
Um,
sized. Yeah.
yeah, never mind. I was thinking in pounds. Ignore me. I've been in America for too long. Um, but I thought it was pretty cool. These mountain lions are taking down black bears. You know, like
Mhm.
because and these weren't like that they were eating on a dead black bear. Like they killed the black bear to eat it. Pretty wild. Um, from that, they deduced that 99% of their diet is black-tailed deer, based on weight. So huge portion of their diet. Um, and then yeah, they identified these top-down effects as being the biggest drivers in deer abundance. They also looked at, as Cody said, they looked at the food resources, which also played a role, but the largest driver was that top-down predation effect. And then the model, and I'm not giving numbers here, like I'm just kind of giving general trends because we can get into the weeds on this stuff all we want. Um, but the modeled survival rates were very low compared to other populations that have been published. Um, and yeah, I remember reading the numbers, and that was the first thought I had. I was like, well, what does this even mean? I don't even know.
Mhm.
But later on, they addressed that, so the survival rates are super low. So that kind of sums up the results. Um, so
I might add
they,
just a
yeah,
couple
go
more
ahead.
details. So, like with that survival, because they broke it down into different classes. So, fawns, as you'd expect, have the lowest survival, and um, I know you weren't given numbers, but I just found it like only like 25% of fawn survival rate was like 25%, which that to me is just like 1 in 4 fawns makes it. Which I guess it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, damn, that's a lot of mortality. And for the fawns, most of that mortality was black bear predation. Um,
But I
and
think
then,
that's pretty normal, like across the board, like not just in this landscape. Like fawns are so vulnerable
yeah,
because again, like they're just laying there. A lot of times their mom
hmm
leaves them, to go forage.
hmm
She's nearby, but yeah, I mean they're super vulnerable in
yeah,
those first 30 days.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, like we were saying before, like we were able to pretty much touch these things, and these, the biologists here catch them in fishing nets. So it makes sense that mortality is so high. But I thought it was interesting that it was primarily black bears, but then after that period, black bear predation on these things was minimal. Right, it was almost entirely the mountain lions, like the 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 does, like their main cause of mortality was black bear, or was mountain lions. Main cause of mortality for the does was mountain lions, and I forget what it was, but it was like I think it was like over 90%, 92% of the predation mortalities on like the adults or non fawns was from mountain lions.
Yeah.
And that's just such a huge shift from primarily black bears as fawns to nope, these things are getting killed by mountain lions. Um, so I thought that was an interesting point. But then also because they had those tagged females with the radio collars, and they were looking to see when they stopped and to see when they were mortality events. And 57% of the deer that were collared that died from predation. Um, and so there was one that died from a black bear. The others were predation events for all mountain lions. So just showing how the really large effect of mountain lion
So,
predation on those older stages.
so you just touched on something that just reminded me. Like there's a study here in Florida for the Florida panther that was recently done. It's like a 5 year long study, kind of similar. Like they tagged all these deer, um, and then when they died, they would go out and investigate the sites to see what killed them, and it was similar. I forget what exactly the numbers were, but the vast majority of deaths of those deer were caused by panthers.
Mhm.
Um,
I want to say it was like upper 80%, was it not? It
I'm
was
pretty
it was
sure, yeah,
really high.
yeah, it was like close to 90% of the deaths were caused by panthers. And again, like this is an animal that doesn't have really high density. I mean, honestly, the density of Florida panthers is higher than um, you know some of these mountain lion populations, but they have such an immense impact on those deer populations, and they got into sort of like the management implications of this. you know they talked about how the survival rates are much lower than what's typically reported, despite the high reproductive rates, which is really the only reason that population is still like doing okay. Like there's still quite a few deer out there, but nevertheless, like the population was in decline and
Mhm.
expected to decline a lot. Um, and I think it's also worth mentioning because I did kind of do like a little follow up search on this. Like this study was done in 2014, so or at least it was published 2014. This is 2008 to 2013. That was 12 years ago.
Mhm.
How has the population changed since then? So I decided to look it up. Like, is it still in decline? Yeah, absolutely, it's still in decline, and it continues to get worse and worse. And they talked about these potential management um, implications, which was basically like, yep, continue with the buck only harvest in the region. It was just basically like kind of just keep doing what we're doing. And I'm like, come on, guys, like why aren't you addressing the elephant in the room? And that is that there's a simple way to reverse that trend, or at least maintain a more stable population, and that is to have very minimal harvest of mountain lions, which I know they haven't done in that region in a really long time. It's been decades, and I understand it's California, and like people, there's a bunch of people that are completely out of touch with nature, trying to manage nature. But like we saw this with the other study that we talked about. You take out of just a few mountain lions from that population, and it can completely change the impact that they have on these deer. And so a really minimal harvest of mountain lions might be really beneficial to this region. And I thought it was pretty weird that the Fish and Wildlife Agency didn't even like talk about that as a potential solution,
Mhm.
Yeah, it feels like they're kind of kicking the can down the road, sort of thing.
I don't know. I
Predator.
feel like there's some political powers at play there,
Oh,
you know?
100%. But see, in the predator prey dynamic, like that negative feedback, you get these annual cycles of highs and lows as predator populations increase, prey populations decrease, and like you said, they found a decline 11 to 18% during the course of this study in the black-tailed deer population. So these, and like you said, Mark, they're still going down. Eventually, you'd expect maybe that these I keep wanting to call them panthers. These mountain lions might there might be more human wildlife conflicts as these populations go down, and then you're going to have people taking out panthers, but it's going to be agencies
Well,
doing it.
I think you kind of like addressed something that Matt brought up in previous podcasts. I don't even know which ones, but this whole idea of uh, you know us managing these populations creates stability. Like if you let them naturally fluctuate, you can have these huge swings in deer population and mountain lion populations because the mountain lions sort of overshoot their carrying capacity. They take out way too many deer, and then they kind of starve and start dying off, and you kind of have this like constant
Mhm.
fluctuation. Whereas if we were to, uh, you know, take out a very small number of uh, those mountain lions, you could prevent those fluctuations and keep a much more stable um, deer population, which again is the resource that really is generating all this conservation funding. That's what's selling those licenses. That's what people are hunting. That's the resource that the wildlife agency really needs to be focused on, and they
Mhm.
could be doing a way better job if they just allowed minimal harvest of these mountain panthers.
Of mountain panthers
Yeah,
or
mountain
So
panthers.
yes,
the bear, because the bear
with,
are in greater density, and we learned. Should we talk about
Both, I
kleptoparasitism?
guess. Yeah, both, I guess.
Because if mountain lions are totally off management table, would bear be more likely? I don't know how politics work over there.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, honestly, I don't know the details of like what their rules are in terms of like hunting bears and panthers, but they did talk about how the the reported kill rates for mountain lions on adult deer was like among the highest in the literature for like
Mhm.
any of their populations, and the reason for that was because of kleptoparasitism, the coolest new word that I've learned. That bears are basically after a mountain lion kills the deer because they're way more effective at killing them. The bear's bigger and they just come in and push the mountain lion off and then take the kill site. Um, so yeah, maybe if you reduce the number of bears,
Panthers don't need to eat as much because they actually, or kill as
well,
much
they
because they actually get to eat. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a potential option.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
so
pretty interesting. Sorry,
Mark, you
Matt.
mentioned a few times how the deer survival here is low, and just to put some numbers to it, so they looked at like 21 other papers where they've looked at deer survival rates, and on average, the deer population survival rate for this national forest was 15% lower. And the other thing I just want to point out, like a lot of folks say, well, you need the mountain lions to help control the deer population, and they'll take out, the sick deer and all that. Like these mountain lions are harvesting healthy, like mature females, and so it's something where
Sure.
that's going to have huge effects on the population too, because it's something where those females are the ones that these are the prime adults. These are the ones that are having that they're contributing to the offspring. And I just to like follow
Well,
up or like we'll go yeah go ahead.
like I was gonna say, yes, like they're taking out these prime female adults, but also, um, any of those senescent older individuals, like they're gonna be taken out at a faster rate, you would think,
Mhm.
because they're just easier prey. But I think what you run into is if you have too many mountain lions, that there's not enough of those easy prey to go around, so they have to start preying on those prime female individuals. So, if there is a little bit of control in those predator populations, you might see a more balance in what age classes they're preying on.
Yeah, that could be. Um, But also, I just wanted to follow back on what you were saying about how the um, management through hunting allows more stable populations. Not only that, but like you mentioned, the management action here has been reduction in number of hunting sales. Basically, it's buck only sales. Um, and when you look at states like Colorado, where huge sections of like large there's whole communities that are based on hunting, and if you're to say, well, you know what? Because this population decline, we have to limit the number of people that are going to be hunting here, and put more limitations on the hunting. That's going to have huge effects on these communities where it's a valuable resource. It's something that it's it's something that as people we can benefit from these organisms. We can still have healthy mountain lion populations. There's a very healthy mountain lion population in Colorado, but you can allow humans to have also this predatory role and maintain stable populations, um, while also allowing the agencies to study these things to have more profits from those license sales and to learn more. And it's this positive feedback where the more license sales you have, the more you can learn about the population, that the better you can manage that population. And in the opposite end of the spectrum, like we're saying here, like this deer population in California is in decline, and it's going to continue to decline. And it's going to, the only thing that the managers can do is say, well, I guess the only lever we have is the hunters. And so, now we're going to have to cut back on hunting pressure. So we're going to have lessen funds. We're going to have less research, and it's just this
It's a
negative
slippery
loop.
slope.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very like, and that's a great point. Like in my opinion, like yeah, I hear you about the communities that are like really dependent on hunting. Uh, yeah, for them it sucks. I agree. But as far as I'm concerned, that's just like the tip of the iceberg of this problem. The real problem is the loss of funding.
Mhm.
And more, the more I dive into these issues, the more I realize that it all, everything revolves around money. It just is what it is. But if we can't find ways to run this like a business and maximize on the profit, it's not even, you can't even really think of it as profit, but to maximize on the funding generated from license sales, tag sales, applications, all this stuff, then we're on a slippery slope where we're not going to have what we need to maintain these natural systems, which I think you could easily segue that into a current event that's happening that we're not going to get into, that's politically driven, where we're getting rid of resources that are needed for us to maintain these natural resources,
Mhm.
and it's not a good trend for any state, country, anywhere you are. It's a bad idea to go that direction.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm
So
getting really dark.
well, and I just want to bring us back to like a summary of the paper results here. Coming back to like what is driving these deer populations, because I think it was really fascinating to see what they found. Because at the beginning we were talking about these bottom up, top down effects, and we've kind of touched on them both. Yes, there's predation effects, but there's also these bottom up effects where they found like the food quality had an influence, but really it was just at those younger stages, those younger ages, which makes sense. But then also that interaction effect that you were talking about before, Mark, where if you have lower food quality for the deer, those deer have to move around more, and they're going to have to leave their, the areas that they know well. And once they get outside of that area, that's when you're going to have some concerns about, higher mortality from predation because they're in an unknown area. And I think
Yeah,
that's something that you can apply that to hunting, or just like from a hunter perspective anywhere. Like if there's good quality food at habitat, expect the deer to stay in that area. But if you're hunting an area where you're not really seeing a lot of good quality food, you can expect those deer to move around more. And it's something that just one thing that I'm keeping in the back of my mind from reading this paper as a hunter, beyond the whole mountain lion deer
yeah.
population dynamics. I thought that was really
That's
cool.
that's
Mhm.
a really good point, and especially, I mean, Florida is like very relatable in a weird way to these deserts
Hmm.
because they're oligotrophic systems. There's not a lot of nutrients, and so I think you get kind of these patches of good quality food sources, and typically. in Florida, at least, when you find an area where there's deer, like they're all there. Like
Mhm.
it's very patchy, and it kind of sounds like that's the same kind of situation in these deserts where there was like these fawning areas, which are like these islands where conditions are better, and they have better food sources, and that's where you're going to find those deer. I
Mhm.
always say, like when I'm hunting, if I see deer, I'm like, I'm going to stay here because deer like deer, but
Mhm.
that's not necessarily true. It's deer like the same thing. So if there's one, there's going to be more.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
How are we doing on time?
Well, we're overtime, so we
Yeah,
need to wrap things up. We're at an hour. Yeah, that flew by kind of fast.
You did.
Kind of
that's a cool
just a really
paper.
long paper.
Mhm.
Well, report.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, honestly, we may have to um, talk about Panthers more. Well, we talked about we're gonna do a paper at some point about Florida Panthers and the effects on deer movement, which I'm really excited about that paper. But that'll come as we get a little closer to deer season. And I was actually hanging out with a Florida Panther biologist this weekend, and we were getting a little nerdy about some of these papers we've been discussing. And ironically, he's actually from California. Like he started his career in California, so I wanted to get him in on this one, but it was kind of last minute. So we'll get him in on another one. So this conversation about Panthers is definitely not over, but I think we have to wrap this one up here. So,
Yeah.
any
Walk the
any
turkeys next
last
time.
thoughts? No, I,
Okay,
I,
why
I
not?
don't
I
I
think
don't
we
have any.
covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, next episode we're gonna be talking turkeys. Make sure you guys vote on which one of those topics you want us to cover. And until then, I don't know. I guess we're gonna be getting ready for turkey season.
Yeah.
You got Matt, what are your turkey plans? You got any crazy plans? You just hunting close to home, I'm guessing.
Yeah, just sticking around here. It's gonna be my first time hunting turkeys out here in Colorado, so I got my work ahead of me scouting out. But it sounds like there's turkeys all over. I saw a nice flock yesterday, but yeah, figure out
Do
what
you
they're doing.
know? Do you know like when your turkey season ends?
End of
It's
May.
end of May, right?
Yeah, mid-April to end of May.
Yeah, I want to come up there. I just don't know if I'm gonna make it work. So it
Okay.
might have to be another season.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna be traveling all over the place in Florida and then a little bit outside of Florida for turkeys. Just gonna probably create a lot of content. So if you guys haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, make sure you do it. It's called Mark Goes Outside. It's super cool. Um, anyway, uh, that's all I got.
All right.
Catch you guys in a couple weeks.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks,
Peace.
guys.